Okay, this is MIDI 1, and the project is drum set, percussion, and bass. What we're going to try to do is do the musicianship side of the assignment first, and then we'll get into the working in the DAW, working in Studio One, and give you an example of what the project looks like pretty much from start to finish. So we have some musicianship to do. We have a little bit of music theory to talk about, and I think where I'd like to start is a place that we've been before in the class a few times, over here at the whiteboard. And the idea is to look at the notes, let's say, of a C major scale. And this time I'm going to write them in the bass clef. And if you're not familiar with the bass clef, the notes do shift a little bit, so you have to kind of learn the positions or the names of the notes in the bass clef. It's different than the treble clef. So the bottom line here is a G, and we do G, B, D, F, A, and the spaces in the bass clef are A, C, E, and G, which we probably talked about in class, but it's also in a bunch of the music theory videos that I have out there. So just don't forget, everything is shifted a little bit. So here we have a C major scale, starting on this C, which is below middle C, and working its way up to middle C. Okay, cool. Nothing new. All white notes on the piano. No big deal. The topic of this project is constructing a bass line to go along with the drums. So up to this point, we've really just been dealing with rhythm, drum sounds, and nothing that involves pitch. But as soon as we play even one note on the keyboard, we're implying so many things about pitch. We have to be careful, or at least be aware of how these things work, how they relate to each other. So using the white notes on the keyboard, there are basically two scales that emerge. One is the C major scale. Or if we were to start on an A, the beginning of the musical alphabet, we would end up with an A minor scale. And for this project, I would like to suggest that you work with either C major or A minor, so we don't have to deal with any accidentals, flats, or sharps, whichever one of those two you prefer. So we've talked about scale. We know that it's a collection of notes that have certain intervals between them. If we start on that C, we follow a pattern of half steps and whole steps that give us the major scale: whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. Here with the minor, starting on the A, we play a pattern of whole steps and half steps that looks like this. Whole, half, whole, whole, half, whole, whole. So that's just the distance between the notes. That's the relationship between the notes. And whenever you follow that pattern, it always gives you what we call the natural minor scale. Okay, either one's fine. I'm going to, I think for this video, use the minor scale, the A minor scale. And this time, instead of marking the intervals between the notes, I would like to number the notes. So we're going to go from what is a scale to numbering the positions or the notes of the scale with numbers like this. One, it's really 1 through 7, and the last note is also a 1, right? Because we're starting on an A. The last note is the top line in the bass clef, which is the note A. So these scales really have 7 notes, and then the 8th note we call the octave. And any note that's 8 notes higher than any other note We also call that interval an octave. Okay, cool. So now we've got numbered scales. What are we going to do with this? Well, I would like to give you two approaches for how you can complete this assignment. And the first approach is to create what I would call a vamp. And a vamp is basically a repeated pattern that you just play over and over again. I guess that's what it means to repeat something, play it over and over again. But it can really just be over one chord. We haven't really talked about harmony yet, but what it basically means is that we can just play the same pattern over and over again and use that as the foundation or the basis of our piece. And this is not that uncommon. Actually, if you listen to reggae music, to me, like the heart and soul of a reggae tune often is just the bass line, and it could just be over like one chord. It could be a very simple harmonic idea, and really you're just getting this bass line that sort of gives the personality and sets the key, the scale that's involved, and it can just be that. So it's okay if you just have a one chord vamp. It can be very effective actually and sound really nice. If our approach is to do a vamp and not worry about a chord progression, which I'll talk about in a second, then I'd like to suggest that we narrow the numbers that we can use for this vamp. And we haven't really talked about it yet, but there's a type of a scale which has only 5 notes, which we call the pentatonic scale. And the pentatonic scale is really useful for things just like this. It's a 5-note scale that sort of leaves out the notes of a scale that maybe can sometimes cause a little bit of trouble, or sometimes people call them avoid notes. There's nothing wrong with those notes, but they imply maybe a different tonality or a different chord. And if we play the pentatonic scale over this minor, it basically gives us a set of notes that always works. And when I play this for you, I think you're going to recognize this scale. So the pentatonic scale for the minor key is going to be 1, 3, 4, 5, 7, and then let's call this 1, if that's cool with you. That way we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 notes, thus the name pentatonic, and we get back to 1. So let's check out what this sounds like. Starting on the A, there's a 3, 4, 5, 7, and back to 1. All right, so that should sound pretty familiar. In fact, if we add just one more note to the scale, we end up with something called the blues scale, which should sound pretty familiar to most people. So with those notes, it's actually really difficult to play something that sounds bad. And I'm going to come over to the piano and show you a little exercise that you can do just for fun. If somebody had no musical knowledge whatsoever and they wanted to make a sound on the piano and have it sound decent, like not bad, then I would tell them to play only the black keys on the keyboard. And if you do that, you'll be in one of two places. You'll either be in F sharp major pentatonic, or you'll be in E flat minor pentatonic, which is very similar, I hope, to what we just did on A minor, right? Here's A minor pentatonic. Here's E flat minor pentatonic, right? So if I just play a big E flat on the bottom and then just play any note I want, any of the black keys on top of that, it won't suck. It won't sound bad. And I can just noodle around on black keys and everything works. So it's a really great way to just play around and find some stuff that works. And it's a great way to create a bass line for a tune. So going back to our white notes that we have on the staff, they are A, C, D, E, G, and A. So what we're going to do is play around with those notes and just come up with something that we like using only A, C, D, E, G, and A. One, right? And you'll find that there's so many possibilities of things that sound really good that you can just play over and over again that make a really great bass line. So I want you to play around with those notes, A, C, D, E, G, and A, and make sure that the A is kind of like the anchor. It's the place that you maybe start and keep coming back to, and you'll create a bass line that sounds really good. It won't suck. None of the notes are going to sound bad. The only other thing I will say about this is that you do have to keep it in the lower third of the keyboard. So if you take those notes and you start playing up here, now you're really, just by the nature of the position on the keyboard, you're really creating melody, right? So bass has to be low. So if we're creating a bass line, we want it to be low on the keyboard. So take those 5 notes, A minor pentatonic, or you could do a major one, I'll show you that in a second, and just play around with it and find something pitch-wise that sounds good to you. And the next thing that we'll have to do with it is marry it together with a drum groove.